Now, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Democracy Now!'s Aaron Mate.
Let's turn now to another report filed by our guest, Al Jazeera's May Ying Welsh, over the summer from northern Mali. In this piece, she explains how the turmoil in Timbuktu made it difficult to manage a severe food shortage.
Abu Bakr walked 2 days from the village to sell his sheep in Timbuktu. He is exhausted and hungry, and his animal is too. No longer able to stand or walk, but it represents his only hope of earning money to buy food. At Timbuktu's main market, villagers hope to sell their animals before they die. Here, drought is wiping out animal herds, and thousands of people who depend on them are going hungry.
This is the worst year of drought I have ever seen. There's no pasture for the animals, and they are starving. There is nothing for them to eat. There is nothing at all.
Abu Bakr is barely awake. He wonders how he can survive. No one wants to buy an animal that's dying. In Timbuktu town, only those too poor or too weak to leave remain. Staples like rice and millet have doubled in price. Freshly slaughtered meat festers in the sun. Most people who had money to buy it have gone.
Who will pay for this? We can't even find someone who has $2. Many people here have become thieves. They've become criminals in the place they were born. The people of this city are afraid. We can't sleep, there is no medicine, there is no water, there is nothing.
At Timbuktu Hospital, the impact of the Sahel drought and security crisis on families is clear. Bags of plumpy nut and a small team of medics from Doctors Without Borders wait for those who make it here. For the man in charge, Timbuktu native Saidou Ba, it's painful to see his city this way.
La malnutrition s'est beaucoup accentuée compte tenu de plusieurs facteurs cette année.
Malnutrition is worsened because of many factors this year. There is insecurity, state services no longer exist. There is the drought, not enough rain. I hope the world will look at Timbuktu, because Timbuktu is living a truly difficult moment today.
Difficile.
It takes days to reach this city by car, and most aid agencies can't take the risk. For now, Timbuktu and its people face this crisis alone, isolated from the world.
And that report by May Ying Welsh, our guest in Doha, speaking to us from the headquarters of Al Jazeera, reporting in that piece from Mali. May Ying Welsh, I wanted to ask you about the U.S. role here. Few people understand that there's actually a heavy connection with Libya in the current conflict in Mali. Can you talk about that?
Well, it is true that a lot of the fighters that started this whole conflict had recently come back from Libya. Tuaregs have been rising up against their governments in Mali and Niger for decades now. And a long time ago, back in the 1980s, Muammar Gaddafi offered them a place in his army and military training camps. So a lot of them went there hoping that they would be able to further their own cause. And they ended up becoming part of his military. When he fell, they came back to Mali and Niger, some of them heavily armed and, in a very desperate position. And they resumed their struggle which has been going on for decades. So I think the fall of Gaddafi in Libya did act as a catalyst for the conflict that we're seeing in Mali. If you want to look at another aspect of U.S. involvement in Mali, the United States government has been supplying Mali and also Niger and other countries of the Sahel with counterterrorism assistance. It's millions and millions of dollars every year in equipment and training and other ways in order to fight Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, which is in the area. And, I've talked to a lot of people who used to work in the Mali government who have told me that that aid that the United States sent, supposedly to fight Al-Qaeda, was actually diverted to fight the Tuareg rebellion in the north, which is kind of continuously simmering and has never fully gone away. And that's, I hope that when this whole conflict calms down a little bit, there'll be a chance for people to really take a look at the mistakes that were made by the previous Malian government and by its supporters in the United States and in the European Union, who really looked the other way on an unbelievable amount of corruption and misuse of the materials that they were giving them, as well as there are very serious allegations that, coming even from neighboring Niger, that the former president himself was involved in some kind of a deal with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, in which the massive hostage ransoms, which were going to, coming from European governments to ransom off the Western hostages and get them free from Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the hostage ransom negotiations were done under the auspices of the Malian presidency. And one of the main negotiators was Iyad Aghali, who is currently the head of Ansar ad-Din, and he was a close political associate of the former president. This man is currently the head of the Mujahideen, who are now attacking Konna and have precipitated the crisis we see now with France intervening. So I think those are some questions we really need to ask. What was the role of the Malian government in creating this crisis, and how did the European Union and the United States enable it?
I wanted to bring in Hannah Armstrong, who is a Bamako-based research fellow with the Institute of Current World Affairs, been analyzing the Sahel region of Africa for the past 5 years, and has spent the past year in Mali and Mauritania and Tunisia. Hannah, you're on the ground in the capital of Mali right now, in Bamako. What is happening there?
Hi, Amy. I can tell you that there's a tremendous outpouring of support for France and euphoria that the intervention has finally kicked off. It's very counterintuitive that the Malians would be thrilled to see, 2,500 French troops arriving on the soil. But, I can attest that that's very much the case right now. When the French talked about, this sense that there was an existential threat, and that in the Islamist events of last week could have easily wound up in taking Bamako, there's really a strong belief here that was the case. There was a lot of panic happening when the Islamists started to sort of map towards the border of territory that's controlled by the military.
Hannah, if you could come closer to your computer, we're having a lot of trouble understanding you.
Sure. Is that better?
Just keep talking.
Okay, well, I was saying that there's really a lot of euphoria. The Malians were quite panicked about the situation with the Mujahideen mapping towards the southern garrison very last week. So they didn't have a lot of confidence in their own army to be able to stand their ground. There were already reports of Malian soldiers fleeing this new offensive. So as counterintuitive as it is for an ex-Africa colony, an ex-France colony to be thrilled about the arrival of French troops and tanks on the ground, I can tell you that it's very much the case. In Bamako, the Malians are actually calling François Hollande Papa Hollande. And there's a huge sense of relief here.
May Ying Welsh in Doha, your response to what Hannah's describing on the ground, euphoria in Bamako with the French French bombing of Mali.
Yeah, I think that France to some extent created Mali by putting northern Mali and southern Mali together, and it takes France to keep it together. Why is the Malian army unable to control the north? Why did so many of the Tuareg and Arab officers and soldiers who were leading, the Malian army in the north, why did so many of them defect or disappear? I think that, there is a real issue here with the Malian army having a difficult time unless and until the people of the north feel a little bit more really invested and feel more like citizens in Mali. Until that happens, until there's massive development in the north and real democracy as opposed to tokenism and sort of empowering certain individuals and cronyism and corruption, instead of enabling drug smuggling and these kinds of forms of controlling the populace and having a few beneficiaries, if they could have a real democracy and include the people in the north, maybe they wouldn't have their Arab and Tuareg officers defecting on them and be unable to military control the north. You know what I mean? I mean, the people of the north clearly don't feel all that invested in Mali, not as invested as the Bambara people of the south clearly do. You know, I mean, either that or the country has to consider other forms of existence, like autonomy or breakup or something else. It's either democracy and real inclusion, like real democracy, or Mali is not headed in a good direction as a unitary state.
May Ying Welsh, you mentioned the defection of Malian forces to the rebels, and in fact there was a very fascinating New York Times piece yesterday reporting that these forces were in fact trained by the U.S., saying, quote, commanders of this nation's elite army units, the fruit of years of careful American training, defected when they were needed most, taking troops, guns, trucks, and their newfound skills to the enemy in the heat of battle. Going on to say that, in fact, an American-trained officer overthrew Mali's elected government, setting the stage for more than half of the country to fall into the hands of Islamic extremists. Your response?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that you know, I think that's very similar to what I just said. You know, that the Malian government, because the people of the south are not. You know, it's the Sahara. It's really different than the southern half of the country. It's the Saharan area requires, you know, certain kinds of soldiers and abilities and certain kind of equipment. And, you know, it was natural for them to, of course, try to use the local people of the area to lead the army up there. That is the natural thing to do. But, you know, like I said before, if you don't have a real democracy underpinning that, where there's real investment on the part of those people, not just in the military and not just in, you know, controlling some drug smuggling routes and giving kickbacks to the president and his wife, you know, I mean, it's, you know, if you're not gonna give the people some real investment in the country, you can expect these kind of defections, and you can expect every single, you know, Tuareg, you know, to turn rebel tomorrow, which is what always happens.
May Ying, we want to thank you very much for being with us. May Ying Welsh, reporter for Al Jazeera English, recently filed an exclusive report from inside Mali's restive northern region, which we'll link to online. Her most recent piece is making sense of Mali's armed groups, working on a documentary about Mali. Speaking to us from Doha, Qatar, from the headquarters of Al Jazeera and Al Jazeera English. And I want to thank Hannah, that we had trouble understanding her, from the capital of Mali in Bamako, Hannah Armstrong, a research fellow with the Institute of Current World Affairs. This is Democracy Now! Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.